right, so for this summative, you're asked to factor some expressions and solve some equations. So just to differentiate between the two and what your answer should look like, when you are asked to factor something, your answers should look something either like this, where you have something with x's in the parentheses, or maybe you took out a GCF and then you have parentheses after that. But either way, your answer should have parentheses in it. Those are factors. Versus when you're asked to solve something, that would be that you start with the parentheses, but then you're setting things equal to 0. So then you end up with like x equals as your answers. Okay, so for that one, you're setting factors equal to 0 and you're solving them. Okay, so you're actually getting answers. So you really just want to pay attention to what each direction is telling you to do. So for this first section, target 1, you're asked to just factor. So that's all of that first type. So we're getting things in parentheses. So first step is always look for a GCF. See if you can divide all of the terms by something. So number 1, 10x squared minus 25x. I can divide both of these by 5. That's the biggest number that goes into both, but I can also take out an x from both terms. Okay, so then if that's all I'm going to do, I'm going to divide by 5x. So I take that out first, and then I figure out what goes in the parentheses to get me back over here. Well, 10 divided by 5, that's 2. And then x squared, if I take away one x, that leaves me with an x. And then there's a minus sign. And then 25 divided by 5, that's 5. And then the x's are going to cancel. And then that's it. I'm not solving it. It's just 5x and 2x minus 5. Okay, so that looks a lot like this first one. There's a GCF first and then parentheses. Okay, number 2, this one has 3 terms. If I look for a GCF, there's nothing that I can divide all 3 of those terms by because we don't use 1 because 1 goes into everything. So if there's 3 terms, there's no GCF. Then I go right to setting up my x, and I want to multiply to the last number and add to the middle, but I have to keep the signs. So I want to multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 11. So if I can't think of that pair right away, I'm going to make myself a list of some numbers that multiply to negative 12. So it could be like 2 and negative 6, or negative 2 and 6, because 1 positive, 1 negative multiplies to a negative. Could be 3 and negative 4, or negative 3 and 4. None of those add to negative 11. So now I go to either 1 and negative 12, or negative 1 and 12. Okay, so think about which one of those would add to a negative 11. You can grab your calculator, you can try it out, but it would be 1 and negative 12. So I write my factors as x plus 1, x minus 12, and that's it. Don't solve it, it's just factor. Okay, now one like number 3, again, first thing I do is check for a GCF, but there's nothing that I can divide 5, 6, and negative 11 by. So we did this one with the wrapping method, but to do that first, we have to multiply 5 times negative 11, which is negative 55. That's what I'm going to multiply to, and then we always add to the middle, which would be 6. So negative 55, again, I can make myself a little list. And I can always just grab my calculator and start dividing things and seeing what works. But this one ends up being, so it's 5 and 11. Now to figure out which one would be correct, I want to add to the positive number. So that means 11 should be positive, so 5 should be negative. And that would fit both qualifications. So then I have x minus 5 and x plus 11. But I'm not done because I started with this 5 and I never divided it, so I have to divide it now. So I'm going to divide both constants by 5. I'm going to simplify what I can. So 5 divided by 5, that's 1. But this 5 I can't do anything with, so now this gets wrapped up front and I leave the 11. Oops. So that's x minus 1, 5x plus 11. And remember, order doesn't matter for any of these, so you could flip-flop those. Okay, number 4. Again, I'm just factoring. Look for a GCF. This one, you can divide all 3 terms by 7. So this one does have a GCF. So I would take that 7 out first. So I would be left with x squared. 21 divided by 7, that's a positive 3. And I leave the x. And then there's a minus sign. And then 35 divided by 7, that's 5. Okay, now you would want to see if you can factor what's on the inside. Well, I want to see if I can multiply to negative 5 and add to 3. The only thing that's going to multiply to 5 would be 1 and 5, and there's no combination of signs that you can make that would make that add to 3, so that doesn't work. Okay, so that means that this is your answer. You did factor it because you took out a GCF, but that's it. Okay, and then number 5, this one is that little shortcut one. If there's 2 terms and a minus sign, then you look to see if you can do the difference of squares. So I can take the square root of 25, that's 5, and I can also take the square root of 81, that's 9. That means I can go right to my answers and say 5x and 5x, 9 and 9. One of them's positive, one of them's negative, and that's it. So it's only if you can square root both of those. Okay, so those were all just factoring. So look at my answers. They all have parentheses. The second page, the back of this, is all solving. So these I'm going to factor at first. So I'm going to do what I just did on most of these, but then I have to take an extra step. All right, so when we're solving, number 6 is already factored for us. So we're just going to use that 0 product property. So that says set each factor equal to 0. Okay, so I did x plus 3 equals 0. I'm going to solve that. So minus 3, and I get x equals negative 3. Okay, second one, I have to add 7 first. So I get 2x equals 7, and then I can divide by 2. So then I get x equals 7 over 2. Or you could say 3.5, either would be fine. Okay, number 7 is very similar. It's just like number 7, someone maybe already took a GCF out or something like that. But this is still its own factor. So this I can branch out as well as x plus 8. So I'll say 4x equals 0 and x plus 8 equals 0. I really suggest showing all of your work so that you don't miss a step in your head. Okay, so this one I would divide by 4, and then anything, 0 divided by anything is just 0, so that's one answer. And then the other one, I'll minus 8, so I get x equals negative 8. Again, the order of these does not matter. All right, so 6 and 7 were kind of already set up for us. We just jumped right to branching things out. Number 8, this one is already set equal to 0, so that's good. So now I need to look at the left part of this and factor it. So just like we did on the front side, look for a GCF first. Sure, 2 goes into 14 and 24, but there's nothing with the x squared, so there's nothing that goes into all 3 of those. So this one, I'm going to set up my x. It's 3 terms. So I'll multiply to the last and add to the middle. Okay, you can go through your pairs of 24, grab your calculator, start dividing. So you can have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 6 and 4. So the one that works would be 2 and 12, because that would add to 14. So I have x plus 2, x plus 12. Now if this just said factor, those are my factors. But this says solve. It's set equal to 0. So now, just like I did in number 6, I'm going to branch each of these factors out and set them equal to 0 and then solve them. So here I'll minus 2. So I get x equals negative 2 for one answer. This one I would minus 12, so I get x equals negative 12 for my other answer. Okay. All right. Now number 9. So here's an important thing on this one. Your equations have to be set equal to 0. I think I even have that down here. I would suggest writing that. Make sure your equation is equal to 0. If it's not, you have to make it. So this one has a positive 5 on the other side of the equal sign, so I'm going to subtract 5. But when I look at the left, that 5 is not a like term with anything else, so that means I'm just going to write these out in order. So I have my x squared, my x, and then I'm just going to tack on a minus 5. Okay, then on the right side, I have my 0, because 5 minus 5 is 0. Now you can go ahead and factor this. But this is that one that has a number in front, right? So now I have to multiply the front and the last. So 3 times negative 5, that's negative 15. That's what I'm going to multiply to. And I'm going to add to the middle, which is negative 2. So if I go through my pairs of numbers that multiply to negative 15, just jot some down. So far, neither of those are going to add to negative 2. Well, I could also have 3 and 5. So if I do negative 3 and positive 5, the bigger number is positive. That means that would add to 2. I want negative 2, so that tells me I just have to change my signs. So 3 and negative 5. Okay, that doesn't mean I'm done yet. So now that means I have x plus 3 and x minus 5. But again, I'm not just going to set these equal to 0 yet because I started with a number out front and I never divided it. So now I have to divide it. So here I have x plus 1, and then this 3 I'm going to wrap up front. So that's 3x minus 5. Now you can go ahead and branch those out. So x plus 1 equals 0, and 3x minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to shrink this up because I wrote a little bit too big. Okay, so if I minus 1, then I get x equals negative 1. That's one answer. Now the second one, I have to do a little bit of work. So I have 3x equals 5, divide by 3. So I'll get x equals 5 over 3. Okay, again, order doesn't matter. That's probably the trickiest one, just because you have to remember to wrap. All right, last one, number 10. So again, remember that your equation has to be set equal to 0. I want to move everything to the side with x squared so that x squared stays positive. So this positive 11x, I'm going to subtract that. I'm going to do this in one step, so I'm also going to add 28 so that when I cancel all of these out, I get 0 on the right side. But whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do the same exact thing to the other. So I'm going to minus that 11x and add the 28. None of those are like terms. I'm just going to write all those out. And now it equals 0. Okay, so now we want to factor that left side. So it's 3 terms. There's nothing I can divide all 3 by. So that means I go right to my x. I'm going to multiply to 28 and add to negative 11. So things that multiply to 28, I could do 1 and 28. I could do 2 and 14. I could do 4 and 7. And I think that's really it. Now 4 and 7 adds to positive 11, but I want negative 11. So remember, to multiply to a positive, you could also do 2 negatives. So this one's x minus 4 and x minus 7. But those aren't my answers. I have to branch these out. And then I have to solve them. So it's actually the opposites of those. So I'll end up getting positive 4. And if I add 7, then I also get positive 7. Okay? All right, you should have been answering questions along the way and checking those. If you need additional help past this, please talk to your teacher and let us know. And we can set up a time to go over things with you. But otherwise, you should be ready for a retake. All right, thanks.